words, and without any further ado, I want to hand the floor to our dear Monica Colomber, who's the Ambassador on Special Mission for Development Financing of our host, Government of Spain. I hand over to you, Monica, for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for these very much inspiring words. I like it very much, and I think it's the best beginning for this discussion. And thank you very much for inviting us to join this very important conversation. You know that for Spain, social protection is one of the fundamental elements to make a difference and to try to achieve an inclusive and cohesive society. I would like also to start by as you mentioned, to recognize the efforts that all delegates and multi-stakeholders in the negotiations and for this compromiso de Sevilla that includes in this paragraph, the 27I, this very call to action, and this recognition of the need of social protection coverage and the need to try to push for an increase of 2 points per year. Also, I think it's important for us to mention also in the action, not part of the compromise of the outcome document, as they mention in paragraph 54, where it says that we welcome and encourage further efforts to strengthen the consideration of social protection and social spending in IMF supported macroeconomic adjustment program. This is a very important recognition of the need to take into consideration social protection and all these programs. In this way, Spain is one of the countries also that are supporting the initiative launched by ILO for the Sevilla Platform for Action that will also encourage countries to invest in social protection coverage. We think that this initiative will enable the exchange of good practices, lessons learned, and momentum to achieve this necessary goal. Spain has become an international benchmark in the field of universal social protection. Our commitment is reflected both at the national and international level. At the national level, Spain implementing the minimum vital income is a benefit, has benefited almost 3 million people and has the purpose to reduce high rates of inequality and poverty within our society. At the international level, social protection is a key priority for Spain cooperation. To support improvement of universal social protection systems, and as it is reflected in our participation in 2 global initiatives. One of that is the Global Accelerator, with a contribution of 10 million euros in 2023. At the Steering Committee, we are supporting priorities such as first, focusing on social inclusion. We support the Global Accelerator, prioritizing the integration of marginalized groups into social protection systems in line with the principle of leaving no one behind. In addition, we are promoting also funding of the MGA initiative, which helps break down silos between the United Nations and the World Bank. Furthermore, as co-chairs of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty with Brazil, launched by this country in the G20 under G20 presidency, we support also social protection priority within this alliance. They try to mobilize capacity and impact. We have also launched with Brazil and other countries an initiative for the Platform for Action for Sevilla within these lines. Dear friends, Sevilla is not the end of the road. Sevilla can be also the beginning of a shared consensus on the importance of advancing and stepping and efforts to build a strong system of universal social protection. You can count on Spain of this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. Those were extremely useful and encouraging words. And I think it's really important to see the paragraph 27I on the extending social protection as the what. how much we want to extend. And as you said, these initiatives, and we have 3 excellent initiatives as you refer to, the Global Accelerator, the MGA, which is a particular partnership under the umbrella of the Global Accelerator between the UN and the World Bank, and the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty as the how. Existing mechanisms that are supporting countries in extending social protection, creating decent jobs, and to enable countries to undergo the many painful and difficult transitions in a way that doesn't leave many people behind. So thank you for that, and also for the reference to the paragraph that urges the IMF to observe in their macroeconomic and fiscal consolidation policies the importance of protecting spending on social protection and social spending more broadly. So thank you for those remarks. I'm going to move now to very briefly to my colleague, Umberto Cattaneo, who's here with us. He's our public finance specialist in our department, Universal Social Protection Department, and I'm going to ask Umberto to explain this 2 percentage point. What does it exactly mean? Is it realistic? Is it going to be achieved? How are we going to measure it? And you can do all of that, Umberto, in 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll try. Thank you very much, Shara, for giving me the floor. So I would like to answer a question regarding why we need a target on social protection coverage. This question was actually posed to us throughout the PrepCons in New York. So some have rightly noted that social protection is primarily financed through taxes and social security contribution. Therefore, they have asked, why do we need a target on coverage? Well, I can answer very clearly on this point. The inclusion of a target on coverage in paragraph 27I of the Compromiso de Sevilla is deliberately and essential. It ensures that investments in social protection are really reaching those who are currently left behind, those who are not protected if they lose a job, those that are not protected if they become pregnant, that if they acquire disability, or simply those who reach the retirement age. So I will now go to the second part of the question that Shara asked me. Why this target is there at the 2 percentage point? Is it realistic? Well, we have looked at our database and we have seen that between 2015 and 2023, 42 countries, mostly developing countries, have achieved an annual growth rate of social protection coverage at 2 percentage points. These 42 countries represent 51% of the global population, which is a very large share of the global population. So this evidence confirms that the target is realistic. But if you would like to hear more context on that, you can come to our SPA event at 6:30 p.m. today. But I will now can tell you a little bit more on that, and I would like to convey the message that this target is also not expensive. We have done some preliminary calculation, and our estimate shows that in developing countries, complying with this target on average would cost only 0.04% of GDP per year. So this is not a large share of GDP. This tells us 3 facts about this target. This target is realistic, it is feasible, and it is also affordable. So there is no need to wait to endorse it. So countries and organizations that would like to endorse, as Spain did, they just need to scan this QR code and get in touch with us, and we will do the work for you. So, and we basically will monitor the target through our social security inquiry. What is it? It is an administrative survey that has been running in the ILO for more than 30 years, where we collect all data on social protection coverage and now also on adequacy of benefit. The full set of data is published every 3 years in our flagship publication on social protection, the World Social Protection. To complement this, we will also launch a new platform, as most of you have heard today in the roundtable with our Director General, a new platform to monitor this target, to monitor country endorsement that will be showcased on this platform, and also to document successful national experiences on expanding the fiscal space to comply with the 2 percentage point target. So I'm pleased now to give back the floor to Shara, and I think I stick to the 3 minutes.
Fantastic. So everything you ever wanted to know about the 2 percentage points I never dared to ask, you know who to go to. With that, I'm going to thank both Monica and Umberto and ask them to step down because we have limited seats here. And then I want to invite our 3 representatives of member states, together with our representative from academic institution, to step up, and I will do the introduction. This will just give us 2 minutes until we quickly change, and I'm going to invite our 3 member state representatives, please, to join. And then we need to change the... Yeah, thank you. Very good. While we get started again with this segment, I've been told, colleagues, when we speak, to speak closer to the mic so people in the back can hear us. It seems like a small room, but obviously the acoustics may not be as effective as we think without the loudspeakers. So please use the mic when you speak. I'm really honored and privileged to have with us 3 representatives from 3 member states that have been very active in this FFD4 process. I'm going to start from Mexico, from Brazil, from Zambia, and I'm also very honored to have a member of academia who was also a member of the independent commission of experts that produced a very important report. Last April, you launched it, if I'm not mistaken, Daniela. So let me introduce our speakers. I'm going to first go to our colleague Regina Rosales Talamas, who's representing Mexico from the Ministry of Finance. Mexico is a very dear friend of the ILO's, and we've been working closely during the whole FFD process with many of your colleagues. And I want to really pick up on Umberto's point about the target being realistic. When we look at the data for Mexico, in fact, your extension of social protection has been almost double the 2 percentage points. It's more like 4 percentage points per annum. And so the question is, really, how was Mexico able to extend its social protection system in this period, considering the difficult macroeconomic circumstances that you had, and also considering that this was also the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. If I can give you the floor, 5 minutes, please, Regina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Shara. Can you listen to me? Yeah. Thank you, Shara. So my name is Regina Rosales. I am representing Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro. So it is a great honor to speak today on behalf of the government of Mexico. I would like to begin by expressing our appreciation to the International Labour Organization, the Universal Social Protection 2030 Partnership, and all co-organizers for convening this important and timely dialogue. We commend your leadership in keeping social protection at the forefront of the global financing agenda. We gather at a critical moment when multiple overlapping crises, climate shocks, economic volatility, growing informality, and persistent inequalities are testing the resilience of national systems. In this context, we echo the central message of this session. Universal social protection is not a luxury, it is a necessity. For Mexico, social protection is a cornerstone of our commitment to human rights, social inclusion, and sustainable development. To strengthen our social protection system, we have relied on evidence-based policymaking guided by institutions such as Coneval, which is our National Council for Evaluation of Social Development Policy. This institution, Coneval, has been instrumental in identifying and monitoring 4 key dimensions of social risk that inform our approach, namely access to healthcare, employment stability, protection against orphanhood, disability and old age, and income security. These dimensions have allowed us to design more targeted and responsive policies, ensuring that our programs address the multiple and overlapping vulnerabilities faced by millions of households. We therefore strongly support the global target of increasing social protection coverage by at least 2 percentage points per year, as outlined in paragraph 27(I) of the Sevilla Commitment. This is not merely aspirational, it is achievable. Between 2015 and 2022, Mexico met and even exceeded this goal. Our population covered by at least one social benefit grew steadily during these years, despite fiscal constraints and external shocks. This was made possible by three core policy shifts. Number one, we worked to decouple access to social protection from formal employment status. Historically, benefits in Mexico were tightly linked to labor contracts, excluding a large proportion of informal workers. By restructuring programs and ensuring that benefits could be accessed regardless of employment status, we expanded our reach dramatically. This included flagship initiatives such as non-contributory pensions for older adults and disability benefits for people with limited income. Number two, we prioritized marginalized populations, including women, rural and indigenous communities, and the urban poor. We recognize that achieving universality requires a targeted approach to equity. For example, social protection coverage among women has increased in recent years due to the greater access to health services and maternal care programs. Moreover, by developing mobile units and digital tools in remote regions, we have narrowed the access gap between urban and rural populations. And number three, we integrated our social protection efforts with broader strategies for financial inclusion. Access to microinsurance, digital wallets, and mobile banking services has proven to be key to enable economic resilience, particularly for women and small farmers. We have piloted initiatives that combine cash transfers with financial literacy programs, helping families not only survive, but also plan ahead. Of course, extending coverage is not only part of the equation. Adequacy, quality, and financial sustainability are equally essential. Mexico has strived to align public expenditures with long-term social objectives, improve the targeting and delivery of benefits, and preserve social investments in difficult fiscal environments. We're also investing in better data systems to monitor coverage and outcomes and support evidence-based policymaking. We recognize that national efforts alone are not enough. Mexico values and advocates for international cooperation as a key of progress. Technical assistance, capacity building, and access to concessional finance must be scaled up, specifically for developing countries. We also support the ILO's work as custodian of the SDG Indicator 1.3.1 and the development of practical tools such as the updated Handbook on Fiscal Space for Social Protection, which can help countries assess and unlock financing options in a sound and sustainable way. Universal social protection is a foundation of resilient, inclusive, and equitable development. As we move forward, Sevilla must be remembered as the real turning point. It is time to shift from fragmented pilot programs of scalable, permanent systems, from temporary crisis responses to long-term rights-based policies, from underfunded ambitions to coordinated investment strategies. Mexico remains fully committed to this transformation. We are ready to continue sharing our experience, learning from others, and working hand in hand with international partners to place universal social protection at the center of global financing agenda and make it a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those excellent points. I'm not going to pretend to summarize them because it would take too long, but I do want to pick up one point that you made about the importance of the right to social protection, not only for workers who are employees and formal, but all workers. Workers in all types of employment, self-employment, working in small and medium-sized enterprises, and how important it is to have that extension of social protection also be part of an agenda of formalization of labor and of enterprises. I think that's a really key point, and I hope that we can go back to it during the discussion. I'd like now to turn to our dear colleague, another colleague who has been with us throughout the FFD process. I'm very happy to have here with me our dear friend Deborah Freire Cardoso, who is the Undersecretary on Fiscal Policy in the Ministry of Finance of Brazil. Another woman colleague from Ministry of Finance. I'm very happy we have an all-women panel here, and the three government representatives of the Ministry of Finance. The new generation the forefront when it comes to policy effort and strategies that you have to finance social protection. As a fiscal policy expert sitting in the Ministry of Finance and seeing what your government is doing, what advice would you give to your peers in other ministries of finance who are keen to protect and expand the fiscal space for social protection, both contributory and non-contributory, as Regina also referred to? How can we do that? What would be your top 3 recommendations? And again, we have 5 minutes, so top 3 recommendations in 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be on a panel led by the ILO. Once again, thanks for inviting me. What an achievement accomplished in the Compromiso de Sevilla, right? In recent years, after the devastating effects of the pandemic and some setbacks in important social protection policies in previous administration, President Lula's third administration began by structurally expanding Brazil's social protection system. So, in the Ministry of Finance, we have been working to build fair financing to support our social protection system, based on 3 pillars. First, tax progressivity. We introduced taxation on offshore investments, expanding the tax base and correcting important distortions like tax avoidance and the asymmetry between labor and capital income taxation. We carried out a major consumption tax reform, merging several taxes into a dual VAT. While revenue neutral, this reform is progressive because it will remove exemptions on luxury items previously included in the basic basket and create a personalized VAT refund policy for low-income households registered in our single registry we call Cadastro Único. This reform is seen as a major driver of productivity gains in the Brazilian economy, which will help structurally increase revenues in the medium and long term. We are now proposing an important income tax reform in Congress, reducing the burden on lower income taxpayers while introducing a minimum rate of 10% on the super rich, who currently pay lower effective rates due to deductions, exemptions on earnings typically appropriated by the wealthiest, and legal loopholes. Although this reform is also revenue neutral, it has the potential to stimulate economic growth by expanding disposable income for groups with a higher propensity to consume, which can also help raise revenue, in addition to fostering a sense of fair financing in society. Interestingly, the proposal to tax the super rich is more popular than the tax cuts themselves. People are demanding fiscal justice. Second, correcting tax distortions and revising ineffective tax benefits. We approved measures to better control and restrict the use of tax benefits. Also, we found political solutions to end some ineffective and costly tax benefit programs. There is still a long way to go in this front, to go on this front. Brazil has serious gaps in the governance of tax benefits. I mean, all countries. But we have made progress on transparency with the declaration of tax incentives, waivers, benefits, and immunities, which we call DIRBI, D-I-R-B-I. This new self-declaration tool for companies provides almost real-time monitoring of tax expenditures and has helped show that these waivers are larger than previously understood. We believe this greater transparency and accuracy on tax benefit magnitudes will be important to build political pressure for closer oversight and revision. Third, expenditure review. Brazil has a highly rigid budget with mandatory expenditures, given its constitutional social protection systems, which naturally creates challenge for expenditure growth dynamics and the necessary reprioritization in a changing social context. Last year, we made change to programs that no longer effectively address contemporary needs, such as the wage bonus, reducing its fiscal impact, and we adjusted the real minimum wage growth to comply with fiscal framework limits, which is key to moderating the growth of social benefits indexed to the minimum wage, because we have a large portion of our social protection indexed to the minimum wage. We also adopted stricter control, monitoring and review measures for the Cadastro Único and programs like Bolsa Família and the Benefício de Prestação Continuada to a non-contributory pension we have, to better control their budgets and ensure that those truly in need of social protection are covered. Our institutionalized expenditure review process is still under construction, but it is crucial to advance so we can reprioritize spending to address contemporary demands, such as those related to care economy, especially in the face of the climate emergency. So I'm out of time, I will run. Therefore, if I were to offer advice to finance ministries in the Global South on what works to expand fiscal space for social protection, drawing on Brazil's experience, my top 3 recommendation would be: first, focus on fair financing by rebalancing the tax burden to make tax systems more progressive. Second, correct tax distortions and revise ineffective tax benefits, reducing revenue waivers that do not benefit society as a whole. And third, reprioritize spending to strengthen social protection systems, ensuring their fiscal sustainability and greater effectiveness in a changing social context. My friends, this is no easy task. Brazil has faced an enormous political economy challenge to build a pact that defines President Lula's 3rd term: broad social protection with fair financing. We are currently facing big challenges in Congress to pass measures needed to correct tax distortions, which are crucial for fiscal balance, but also for fiscal and social justice. Yet, we believe there is no other path forward. We will persevere because this is the only way to bring prosperity to all in a challenging global context we find ourselves in. Brazil is happy to endorse the global initiative supporting the extension of social protection covered and supports the SPA led by ILO. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Another stellar really stellar presentation with very to-the-point advice for other countries of the South on fair financing, fair taxation, correcting tax distortions, and reprioritizing in the context also of what you mentioned of importance of looking also at minimum wages, given the importance of the way in which social protection benefits are sometimes indexed to either minimum wages or median wages. So again, this issue of looking at the broader picture and the labor market more broadly, very important. We wish you all the best in the struggles that you will have in the Congress, and we hope that Brazil will continue to be a front runner in this struggle for fiscal justice. I want to now turn to my left, to Prudence Kaoma, who's been another colleague with whom we have been discussing issues throughout the FFD process in many of the PrepCons. You have received many emails from all of us here, Prudence, and we were really keen to have you on this side event when we can at least celebrate the compromiso that we have. Prudence Kaoma is the Permanent Secretary, Budget and Economic Affairs in Ministry of Finance of Zambia. And Zambia has a very interesting experience to share. Maybe Prudence, you can tell us. I mean, Zambia defaulted on the Eurobond payments in 2020, becoming the first African sovereign to do so during the pandemic. Yet, despite this, Between 2015 and 2022, Zambia displayed an annual increase in social protection effective coverage of 2 percentage points actually per year. So tell us, what was the main strategy that you used in order to safeguard your social protection expenditure, I want to say your social investments, following this default on the Eurobond? And what has worked, and how have you managed to keep this steady growth? Over to you, and you have 5 minutes with us.
Thank you so much, Shara, and indeed it's been a journey. And we are very happy to be part of the final outcome document that will be adopted here in Sevilla. And we look forward to a good opportunity to take forward the many progressive proposals that are in the document, to see that most countries actually expand their investment, including in important sectors such as social protection. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Zambia welcomes this opportunity that we've been given to share our national experiences on safeguarding social protection expenditure and creating fiscal space to advance the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Particularly, we are very much concerned to ensure that we make headway and progress in terms of achieving the targets on SDG 1, SDG 2, which is ending poverty, SDG 2 on ending hunger, and SDG 3 on ensuring healthy lives for all. So the frameworks that have really helped Zambia to keep the momentum in terms of increasing its allocations for social protection in the budget have been anchored on the country's resolve to ensure that our long-term objectives that are outlined in our National Vision 2030 anchored onto the attainment of the SDGs are realized. As a country, like you said, we've been exposed to serious structural, economic, and climate change vulnerabilities. During the pandemic, we really faced challenges in terms of the fact that we faced some economic challenges with the slowdown of a number of activities, as well as the de-investment that happened in our mining sector, which is a big sector for Zambia in terms of foreign exchange earnings and to support the budget. Most of the mining operations came to a halt, and the businesses that are highly dependent on this sector in terms of forward and backward linkages were also affected. And most of the SMEs really closed down or really just sort of slowed down significantly. So with this, we really saw that the country faced huge challenges. We also, a few years later, in 2023 and 2024, suffered a most debilitating drought that left the country with a huge deficit in terms of electricity supply, considering that the country has most of its power supply based on hydropower electricity, in the case for adopting clean energy. This debilitating drought also actually had notable devastating impact on the economy and on society, the Zambian society in general. However, about 5.8 million of our 20.8 million population actually got affected by these two big crises that I mentioned, and we found that a number of people actually needed humanitarian assistance. We had been making huge progress from 2015, post-MDGs, as we adopted the SDGs to increase our allocation towards social protection. The main framework being our national development plans, which have put one of our outcome pillars as investment in human capital. And that means that the country does not want to leave anyone behind. It wants to increase its allocations to health, education, as well as social protection. So through that commitment, the country has been progressively increasing its allocations in the national budget towards some of these key sectors. during the declaration of the drought, this meant that the nation had to actually double up its measures and strategies to mitigate the impact of climate change as well as the drought, as well as the debt burden that the country had been facing. So this gave impetus to the government to actually put more resources into social protection, other than reducing the allocation to respond to the drought by addressing, for instance, importation of electricity and other urgent needs that came along. But rather the country ensured that it approached its partners, and it itself within its local revenues reallocated more resources by refinancing programs that needed to be responsive towards the social protection needs of the country. So the social protection approach that has been taken by the country is built around a multifaceted life cycle framework, which is anchored on our National Development Plan. It looks at ensuring that annual budgets and sector-specific strategies are in our plan, and the annual work plans reflect this in terms of our medium-term frameworks. In the recent past, as we increased our allocation towards social protection to respond to the major emergencies that happened and had impacted on our society, we implemented quite a number of strategies. We stepped up the already ongoing and conditional cash transfer for vulnerable households through the provision of cash transfers. We also added on a new program, which was called a Cash Plus, which was implemented in 2024 and 2024 and is still ongoing. The cash support, the Cash Plus entailed that we provided nutrition support for pregnant and lactating mothers. We also introduced what is called Cash for Work for vulnerable youth whose businesses were affected by the drought, as well as emergency cash on top of the existing cash transfer in disaster-affected areas to support households whose livelihoods were terribly affected by the drought, posing a risk of them falling back into the net of poverty. We also stepped up our empowerment programs specifically for women to enhance their coping strategies and ensure that they were protected from the impact of the drought and economic downturn that they faced because of the effects of COVID. We also continued to provide provisional agriculture input support, particularly for rural vulnerable households and households headed by the aged, who are actively involved in agriculture to safeguard their livelihoods. We also provided social security schemes through the Pensions and Workers' Compensation Fund, and also increased the health care coverage through the National Health Insurance Scheme, NIMA. So all these programs that were implemented, by the end of 2024, Zambia's social protection program had reached about 2.5 million households, positively impacting over 13.9 million people of our 20 million population, many of whom are among the most affected by drought. Our 2025 national budget actually reflects this priority as well, meaning we still have that momentum to continue increasing our investment in social protection, with about 16.2 billion or 7.4% of the national budget allocated to social protection programs. This is not seen as expenditure, but as a strategic investment in our human capital. And as a country, we know that sustaining and expanding these efforts requires more than ambition. Sustainable financing remains a critical factor, and social protection in Zambia has historically relied on a mix of domestic resources, cooperative partners, multilateral support. And we recognize this as an important cooperation or partnership that needs to be sustained through innovative mechanisms that are outlined in our outcome document that will be adopted during this conference. And moving forward, as a country, we are committed to broadening the fiscal space for social protection investments by safeguarding progressive, predictable budget allocations, even in the face of macroeconomic pressures, such as the continued debt burden. And I just wanted to point out that in 2025, we reached agreement with most of our creditors. We have signed agreements to actually begin to pay back debt, and we have started paying back debt. But our investment, like you saw in my earlier presentation on social protection, has still not fallen down or fallen back. So it really demonstrates a strong resolve by the people of Zambia to ensure that no one is left behind. We are also engaging the private sector as a key partner through public-private partnerships to unlock innovative service delivery. Increasing employment, trying to trigger investments in the mining sector and other big sectors such as agricultural value chains in order to create employment, promote co-financing models to expand the coverage. We are also leveraging on development cooperation and aid to pilot blended finance and public-private collaboration, which can later be scaled up, especially in sectors such as water supply and sanitation, in areas that are underserved. We are also expanding contributory schemes through formalization of the informal economy to strengthen institutions such as the National Pension Scheme Authority and the National Health Insurance Scheme, while working to actually increase our revenues from the contributions. We are also looking at improving implementation efficiency through investments in data systems, repositories, and how we monitor effectively the fact that we need to ensure that those that actually deserve to be on social protection continue to be on social protection, and to ensure that we continue to adjust social protection policies in real time, as demonstrated through the years of drought and other risks, where government was able to respond quickly to the needs and impacts and ensure that the social protection was preserved. In closing, Zambia remains resolute in translating our pledges into practice. We believe social protection is the cornerstone of an inclusive recovery, resilience building, and long-term development, because we look at it as an investment. With continued innovation, strong partnerships with others, and the right financing mechanisms, both domestic and international sources, we believe that we can build a future where no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prudence. I mean, every time we hear you, I think, it kind of reminds me of that. There is no alternative, there are alternatives. And I think it's great to hear about what Zambia was able to do, given this conviction in the importance of continuing to invest, because not only you want to have social resilience and social stability, but also because it makes economic sense as well, in order to have an economy that jumps out of these crises and not goes down a spiral by more measures of austerity. So thank you for that. I want to just give us a little breather in case you have any very specific factual questions you want to ask. I just want to pick up maybe a couple of questions in case there are any burning questions before I hand over to Daniela for her reflections on what we heard. If there are any burning comments, questions that you want to address to the three speakers that spoke about their national experiences. If not, I can go ahead and hand over to Daniela. But I'm going to give you 1 minute to maybe I see a couple of hands at least. Barry, you were first, and then the gentleman at the back.
Actually,
okay, now we have 4, but can you please keep the questions short?
It's not even a question, it's a plea to the representatives of Brazil, Mexico, Zambia, and Spain that they talk to the executive directors of the IMF who vote on country programs, and sometimes don't take too much account of the obligation to maintain and expand social protection. That's it.
Excellent point. Thank you very much. And I'm sure our colleagues are probably in conversation with some representatives, but I think that's an important point to pick up. Thank you, Barry. The gentleman in the back, yes. And then I think I'm going to pick one more.
Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Hod, ITC Africa. I just want to ask, I mean, the 2% that we're hearing about is good. We acknowledge that it's a good step, but you know, we also know that in 10 years' time, globally, you are hitting just about 67%, which is still not very universal, which means you have some 30 years to go with this margin. So I don't want to be overly excited. The second is that for Africa, I haven't heard the word informality. And it is quite varied, where we have about 13 to 17% coverage. That is, you know, very problematic. And so with this 32%, the question is there a plan to look at it in a different way that, you know, boosts this kind of universality?
Thank you very much. One more question or comment, but please keep it brief so that I can go back to our panelists.
Yeah, hi, Dinesh from the Inclusivity Project. I'm from the Dalit community in India, which is an outcast community, as some of you may know. So we face structural and systemic forms of discrimination. We're excluded from most social protection services because we're in the informal economy. And it's not just caste discrimination in India, but it's also similar forms of discrimination across the world. The Roma communities in Europe, the Quilombola in Brazil, Haratini in Africa, and other such communities, where this form of discrimination is not even recognized by governments. So how do we make the commitments in the outcome document work for these communities?
Great. I think I can maybe give a brief, maybe minute for colleagues to respond to the specific questions, particularly on informality, on how to reach the most excluded and discriminated against groups. On the 2 percentage point, I'll just take the liberty of saying, if you read that paragraph, it says at least 2 percentage points. And we know that if it's kept, if the 2 percentage point is kept as the ceiling, we're not going to get to universality. But we had to have, as Umberto explained, a figure that was kind of realistic and not too aspirational. But please argue for more than 2 percentage points so that we can reach universality by 2030. But I want to give the chance to other panelists to please come in briefly, and then I'll hand over to Daniela.
So I will take the floor first and very briefly address the issues on informality and the discriminated groups. So for the Mexican experience, informality, a lot of Mexican economy is big on informality. And before, we only had social protection based on the relationship that you had with your formal worker. So we had a reform in which now social security can be given to people regardless of their employment status. So as Sharon was mentioning, we have now the opportunity for people in informality or working by themselves or in small and medium enterprises to access social security programs, and we have been creating this way of including everyone that deserves social protection. We have a lot of institutions and we have been continuously reforming them to address the Mexican reality because we couldn't rely only on formality. That's not the Mexican, we operate in informality, so we had to address this. And regarding the discriminated groups, I would call them marginalized groups in the Mexican strategy. And what we are doing, we have been doing and are doing right now, is to expand our digital inclusion and financial inclusion strategy. So two, let's say, arms of the same strategies to have financial literacy for people, for women, for adults, for indigenous communities, as well as digital access to these financial services. So they both go hand in hand. And it is not only for social protection, but also for other kinds of benefits, let's say remittances, for example. So yeah, I will cut here.
Thank you. Thank you. Deborah, very briefly.
Very briefly. I mean, about informality, it's a very, it's a big issue also for Brazil. I think we have to find ways to improve formality because it's a way to raise revenue for contributive and also for non-contributive social protection. We expect that the VAT reform will improve formality in Brazil, mainly because of the refund, because of the cashback for poor households. This should increase formality. And also, I think Brazil, I mean, we have two big programs two non-contributive big programs as Bolsa Família and Benefício de Prestação Continuada for informality people. So I think we have to raise formality to finance this kind of programs as the Bolsa Família, as the cash transfer programs, and also as the Benefício de Prestação Continuada.
Thank you.
I think the strategies are similar. We are also expanding our, like I said in my earlier presentation, expanding contributory schemes through formalization of the informal economy and strengthening institutions such as the National Pension Scheme Authority, NIMA, the Workers' Compensation Fund, and others, using ICT mechanisms to capture as much of the informal economy as possible. And as mentioned, like the Brazilian model, we have the non-contributory social protection benefits, which are paid through mobile transactions, so you need to register somehow, and through that you are captured. And we see that that is one way where we are seeing a lot of coverage of the informal sector. Thank you.
I think those were excellent responses to the very good questions that we had. Being conscious of time, I want to now move to Daniela Gabor, who is a professor of economics from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS in London. And Daniela is a member, as a member of the International Commission of Experts on Financing for Development, that produced a report, as I said, launched a report in April 2025. And I would be interested to hear from you, Daniela, your reflections. Having been a member of that independent commission, having produced that report, when you read the outcome document, in your report you called for a renewed development finance agenda. Renewed development finance agenda. How far do you think the outcome document goes in renewing the development finance agenda? If I can have your reflections on that, and maybe in doing so, being a very good academic and being able to think on your feet, maybe you can also refer to what you heard from our colleagues from member states. So over to you with a very small ask. You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. I was told 10, so I got...
No, 10. You have 10 minutes.
I can go faster.
No.
I'm from Romania. I had 3 coffees this morning. I can speak super fast. I'm sorry for you guys, but we can do that. So let me first start by trying to... I'll come in a second to what I think is different in Seville than in Addis. But let me just, if I had to summarize the 3 interventions that we heard so far, is that extending coverage is a political choice. It's very clear to me that these 3 countries in very different sets of circumstances have managed to do that. And this is great to hear, because I live in Romania and I live in the UK, where a Labour government is trying very hard to roll back coverage and increase spending on warfare. So this we have to bear in mind, that extending coverage is a political choice. And the second point I wanted to make is, I read, so I don't want to sound downbeat, but I might. I read the excellent report that the ILO produced, the flagship report on World Social Protection 2024 to 2026, which if you want to get depressed, I recommend you read. Not because it's an excellent report, but it paints, to me, one of the starkest pictures of global inequality that you can think of. not just we usually think about debt distress and how many countries can do this and how many countries can do that, but if you read that report, there is such an inequality in the coverage that to me it was quite shocking, since I'm a professor of macrofinance and I think about the macro and finance questions. So just to say, high-income countries spend 24.9% on social protection, whereas low-income countries a mere 2% of GDP, 2% including health coverage. That to me is a shocking number. And from that perspective, 2%, extending 2% coverage, as the colleague in the back noted, doesn't sound super ambitious. There is another very depressing statistic in that report, which is out-of-pocket expenditure on healthcare is increasing globally and pushed 1.3 billion people into poverty in 2019. I bet that number is higher today. We don't have the statistic because we don't collect it properly, but maybe correct me if I'm wrong. So remember with these things in mind. Now, the question is, it's fine that it's a political choice. That political choice can run both ways, but how do we accelerate, how do we go beyond the 2% if we could, from the perspective of what is happening, what has happened in the Seville process. And I would say the outcome document, to me, is somewhat more ambitious than I expected initially, being part of the expert commission and having studied how we think about development paradigms since Addis Abeba, and you can find there references to fiscal constraints on fiscal space that have to do with illicit financial flows, and we all know what they look like. You have references on debt distress, and we all know what that looks like. We all know paragraph 50F. Then there are the references, or there is some kind of intimation to the political economy of taxing corporation and the wealthy. So we all know these are in there. It's good to have them in there. They sound kind of stronger in the wording than the Addis document had. But are these enough? So this is where I now put my hat on as a member of the International Expert Commission. And I find three headwinds against an ambitious acceleration of these. And the first headwind has to do with how do we think about development financing and who is responsible for development financing at national level. And you heard on this panel only questions about how a government can change expenditure or can fiddle with taxation in order to increase fiscal space. And for many governments in the Global South, that's difficult because you have external pressures of the IMF asking for austerity, you have external pressures of the private creditors who we still haven't been able to mandate to participate in debt restructurings, and that's a kind of faraway ambition in many ways. We have no mention in the outcome document on one public institution that can and has increased fiscal space since 2008 in high-income countries, during the COVID pandemic in high and middle-income countries, and that's the central bank. It is still a Washington consensus neoliberal taboo to talk about central banks as public institutions. We heard from a high UN official today who said that central banks said that they don't want to be in the financing for development document. How is this possible that the public institution can tell elected members that they don't want to be in a document that talks about financing for development? So that's one headwind. We are not so far away from 2015, and we are not so far away from the Washington consensus as we think we are. My second concern has to do with the ongoing pressure to move away from pay-as-you-go pensions, more into funded pensions, and the privatization of pension systems that is taking place in Europe at a pace that is quite remarkable, but is taking place elsewhere. I can talk to you about the Trump administration proposals, but not necessarily here. And why does this matter? It matters because we are seeing what happened in Europe is a rapid change in the social bargain between the social contract between the states and citizens is moving to a social contract between citizens and financiers. And you all remember why financiers matter in this room and matter in Seville and matter in Addis Abeba, because the billions to trillions agenda and the billions to trillions motto told us that we have to get the trillions of financiers in order to get development financing and in order to get the sustainable development goals. And I just want to give you a number of why I think thinking about the financiers or global finance, BlackRock or Blackstone or Apollo Asset Management, why it matters. They are now sitting, private equity funds, which are taking money from our privatized pension funds, are currently sitting on 4.5 trillion in what they call dry powder, in money that is not invested, in any kind of, revenue-generating infrastructure, water, a road. They are sitting on it. That's our pension contribution. So there is, to me, as a macroeconomist, there is this concern that still we live in a world where the 2% target is hiding structural shifts against better coverage in general terms. And this takes me to the final point, and then I will finish, and then we can continue. What I find interesting about, I don't know how many of you listened this morning to the official interventions, what I find interesting is that the billions to trillions motto has completely disappeared. If you are actually, everybody is denouncing it, which is kind of interesting, including the World Bank is denouncing it, although the World Bank hijacked Addis in order to say billion to trillions. And you think, okay, they say we can't mobilize trillions in private investment, it's very difficult, we shouldn't think about it, but the motto disappeared, but the development paradigm that this billions to trillions agenda proposes, it hasn't disappeared. The development paradigm, it's called investable development. You can hear the code words are mobilizing private capital, de-risking, blending public and private finance. I would urge you, I did this, I would urge you to look at the titles of the sessions in these 3 days. Half of them are about how to mobilize trillions. The investment model is the same, and why does this matter when we talk about social protection and social coverage? Because it is a model that says you should use scarce public resources in order to try to get the billions that financiers like private equity funds who are sitting on this dry powder. You should use public resources in order to mobilize private investment. And what's the difference between Addis and Seville is now we have mobilized but for development outcomes. And I urge you to read our report just for this reason. We are saying, when we are asking, what does it mean to mobilize for development outcomes? Because investable development means investable housing, investable health, investable water, investable education. It's all privately owned or privately run. User fee or government de-risking, paying subsidies in public-private partnerships. And the outcome document is great because it kind of engages and recognizes the shortcomings of this investable development model. It says there is no transparency. The contingent liabilities create gigantic fiscal pressures, and I'm thinking Ghana, I'm thinking Ghana and not Zambia, sorry, no, you're next to me. I am going to Zambia, but maybe you told me, I'm sure there are some contingent liabilities in your PPPs as well. And so Seville says, okay, we recognize that there is lack of transparency, we recognize that we're not distributing fair the risks and returns between the public sector and private investors, but it doesn't specify how this could be done better. There are no institutional mechanisms in that report and in the outcome document, and I would urge you to read our report because we are saying, first, you have to have developmental carve-outs from this model, and health should be a developmental carve-out. It should be public health, not public-private partnerships. Look at the experience of Turkey in PPPs in health, it's mind-blowing. The amount of fiscal resources that they are paying to compensate a French asset manager for building their hospitals. So we are saying developmental carve-outs for water, for education, for health, and this directly touches on the ILO report, but we are also saying there has to be a stronger state governing of blending finance, of de-risking, of any kind of private capital mobilization. And that means conditionalities, that means institutional mechanisms for closely monitoring and penalizing private investors who are not delivering on the developmental outcomes. Otherwise, the difference between Addis and Seville, which is now investable development, but with development outcomes, will still be to be billions to trillions, and it will still be in the world of Addis. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, I think, for those very candid observations and comments, particularly with that perspective about changes that have, what has changed and what has remains the same. Plus ça change, before we see any big changes with all the change in rhetoric, but some of the realities on the ground are not shifting as much as I think we would like to see. And I think you raised the importance of the role of central banks. You also raised very important points about the questioning of the privatization of not only some of the infrastructure, but also when it comes to social protection systems, the privatization of pensions. This has been a big issue. It was a big issue in the 80s and 90s and remains a big concern. And the way in which we can have the kind of coalitions that are needed to really contest and change much of this development paradigm and create the space for development finance in order to invest in the public services and public provisions. With that, I want to open the floor for a few maybe reactions and comments, but I do want to make it very short because we need to give the floors I want to give the floor to our social partners, who I think will also have a very important perspective to bring to this debate. So maybe a couple of quick questions, just to give a breather to all of you. If you have questions you want to raise to our panelists. If not, I could go to the social partners and then open the floor. I don't see any burning issues. I think you're still absorbing maybe what you heard. So with that, I'm going to ask our panel to maybe step down if you can find a seat, and to invite the two social partners to come to the panel. Colleagues, please remain seated. I'm going to be going to introduce the two social partners that we have here to add to the discussion, and then hopefully there'll still be some time and we can open to the floor. First, I want to give the floor. I will start with my colleague on the left, Julius Kainle, who's the Vice President of the Federation of Free Workers, FFW of the Philippines, and who's representing the International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC. So let me start with him. You have 5 minutes, Julius, and then I will turn to Amadou Sakho, who's sitting on my right. So let's begin with you.
Yeah, thank you, Shara. It's a pleasure to join today. We express our gratitude for the work of the ILO to defend its role within the FFD4 negotiations and to the Global Partnership for USP 2030. Thank you as well to the government and people of Spain, Brazil, Zambia, Mexico, with whom we share a lot of history, thanks to Spain. The global labor movement is a strong advocate for expanding social protection coverage, and Philippine trade unions are no exception. Social protection is a cornerstone of our call for a new social contract, which trade unions are fully committed to. We need to ensure universal social protection systems that reduce poverty, inequality, and social exclusion, complemented by measures to secure workers' rights, create decent jobs, and promote equality and inclusion. However, as you all know, the world is significantly lagging behind in terms of social protection coverage, which has contributed to high levels of poverty and inequality. Across the Asia-Pacific region in 2023, only 53.6% was covered by at least one social protection, where women lag behind men in effective coverage by 6.8 percentage points. In the Philippines, only 34.9% of the population was effectively covered by at least one social protection benefit. Trade unions report that benefits are often insufficient to meet basic needs. These gaps in coverage and benefits are closely linked to the major financing gaps we face. To make progress, we must urgently scale up financing for social protection. The Compromiso de Sevilla represents a win on social protection, as it includes a measurable target for developing countries to increase social protection coverage by 2 percentage points annually, a goal championed by the ILO. It next also appropriately refers to ILO standards and emphasizes the need for predictable, adequate, and sustainable financing, particularly during shocks and crises, and underlines the role of multilateral development banks in helping low-income countries close their social protection funding gaps. Social protection as one of the 4 pillars of the ILO Decent Work Agenda is also highlighted in the Compromiso, as it sets out joint commitments to invest in productive sectors, create decent jobs, support skills development, increase investment in the care economy, and promote the formalization of the informal economy. In the Philippines, we've had hits and misses. As early as 2019, we enacted a Universal Healthcare Law and a Bolsa Familia pattern conditional cash transfers law. However, implementation leaves much to be desired. The concept of ayuda, or direct assistance, became the norm at the height of the pandemic, with beneficiaries determined by their political affiliation or personal ties with government officials, and not based on who needs it most, and thus delinking human and sustainable development goals to cash transfer for families. The Philippine Health Insurance Corporation, on the other hand, does not enjoy subsidies from government anymore. We at my federation filed a petition at the Supreme Court questioning the constitutionality of the Finance Department's order to return alleged excess funds intended for universal health care to the National Treasury for investments. This is the irony of ironies, where social protection institutions seem to finance government investments instead of government investing in social protection. Thus, we need accountability and transparency in managing and governing social protection from the national level to international financing levels. Digitalizing social protection, as what Mexico has done, is commendable. In poorer countries, though, it is important to address the digital divide to bear all the fruits of digitalization. Taxation is also a key element to finance social protection. The Sevilla outcome includes a clear commitment to advancing fair and progressive taxation by promoting just tax systems, enhancing international tax transparency, and ensuring that corporations and the ultra-wealthy contribute their fair share, as what Brazil is pursuing towards achieving fiscal justice. While the language regarding the UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation has been softened, the outcome of FFD4 still encourages support for strengthening global tax cooperation, including through participation in the process toward establishing a UN tax convention, an important move toward tackling tax avoidance and creating a more inclusive and equitable international tax system. In the Philippine context, we need to stop the trend of lowering corporate taxes over progressive taxation and dealing with tax avoidance, as what Brazil has done, if not tax evasion. We also need to widen the tax base by removing workers from precarious towards decent working conditions to enable them to contribute taxes and help build the contributory social protection mechanism. As such, it is crucial to ensure an effective ILO convention on platform work is adopted next year to complement our efforts at the FFD. The shortcomings of FFD4 hamper, if not worsen, financing of social protection. Governments must view social spending not as a burden, but as a strategic investment. IPUC research demonstrates that investments in social protection can yield nearly twice their value in economic returns by boosting employment, demand productivity, and overall economic growth. However, beyond domestic measures, strengthened international support is crucial. Despite global recognition of the critical role of social protection it plays in social and economic development, international financing for social protection remains fully inadequate. Okay.
Sorry, just short of time. Do you want to just wrap up what you?
Yeah, maybe I
some key
can.
Points?
Yeah, hopefully we can cover some when we get
back to the discussion. Yeah, I want to be fair also to Amadou, who's patiently sitting here on my right. So I'm very happy, Amadou Sakho, to have you as the advisor for Africa with the International Organization of Employers, IOE, and we look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's never easy to be the last speaker. I'll try to be brief.
If we can keep the door shut so that...
I'll try to be brief, and thank you again for inviting the IOE. Quickly, for those of you who who are not familiar with the ILO system, the IOE serves as the Secretary of Employer in the International Labour Organization, where we represent about 150 employers organizations globally, representing over 15 million companies. So the paragraph 27 of the Compromiso de Seville calls for integrating the financing of social protection into national strategies and pledges support for countries expanding coverage, especially in developing countries. So this is a positive step. This is a very good step. And I want to mention here clearly that the employers group fully believes in the importance of expanding social protection in a way for it to be universal and also sustainable. And an important point is that we must not overlook, and it's important to mention it, that there is too often a gap between political will and real-world implementation. So the real question is not only how to expand social protection, but how to do it in a way that is financially sustainable, institutionally grounded, and that is aligned with the reality of labor market. So my intervention will be focused on developing countries for obvious reasons. They're the ones with the biggest challenge in terms of social protection coverage. And Mrs. Razavi, you have mentioned at the beginning a very important point. When it comes to social protection, there are many challenges. You mentioned illicit financial flows. You mentioned debt, the weight of debt. You mentioned resource mobilization. I will focus on the private sector dynamic, which touches on the resource mobilization, even though I'm fully aware that the challenges can be more comprehensive. So, first of all, an important challenge to mention is the pressure. Public finance being under pressure due to structural challenges. So, in middle income and low income and middle income countries are already operating in conditions of extreme budgetary constraint. And many of them, they do not have the capacity to fully meet their sovereign obligation for many reasons, including the weight of the debt. And including some other structural challenges, low productivity, weak performance of enterprises or economic units, narrow tax bases, which make this necessary fiscal space to support comprehensive and social protection very elusive. And still, those states are being asked to found long-term entitlements, while most of the time the economics reality or not, the economic requirements are not fully present. I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm really trying to present a point of view which is trying to have a pragmatic approach. So I mentioned earlier I talked about labor markets. Let's delve a bit deeper into labor markets dynamic around the world, and I'm happy that the topic was raised earlier. According to the ILO, about 60% of the workers around the world, a bit over 60% of the workforce is informal, is into informality. And it's important to understand that in certain regions like Africa or Southeast Asia, it's up to 80%. And informality, as you all know, are economic activities that are not covered or are sufficiently covered by legal arrangement. However, you need to understand that in this context of countries with high informality, it's not just a legal issue or a temporary issue. It is a deep structural issue that is linked to several problems. Poor governance, it's important to mention it, lack of enforcement, lack of skills at the individual level, or simply lack of appropriate path to foster transition to formality or to function in the formal. So just to say that this makes payroll tax very complicated, because it simply does not exist when we take the majority. And when we take developed economies or formal economies, payroll tax is the main system to finance social protection. So this is impossible in most countries of the world. So countries need to diversify their financing approach. Some have been mentioned earlier. So with targeted tax-based schemes, and simpler contribution mechanism, especially for self-employed and informal economic workers. So to conclude, because I know that we have a time constraint, it's very important, if we want durable systems, we must start with economic fundamentals. And one of them is productivity, because productivity drives income growth, expand the tax base, and enable long-term fiscal planning. Now I know when we business people mention productivity, it's often misunderstood, because the first thing that comes to most people's mind is they just want more profit. It's not, and this is where the fiscal justice also matter comes on the table, which is another topic. But productivity is the basis, because without productivity, which is the ratio between outputs and between inputs and outputs, it's impossible to create wealth. Wealth in which the different well-being collectives, wealth into which the different mechanisms for collective well-being will be. So, since I'm short on time, I will end there and just say that in this also, please, employers and worker organizations have an important role to play, because we are the one, we take a step back, analyze the different dynamics, so there is a necessity to strengthen the capacity. Message for the ILO. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to really give a round of applause to our speakers. Don't go. I think the kind of discussions that we have in the ILO with the employers and workers organizations, I have to say it's at a level that I haven't usually seen in many global discussions. And the employer's perspective, I think, does bring and adds a lot of value to our discussions, as do the workers. And I think this issue of productivity that you raised is a very important one. But it's also a vicious circle. I think investments in social protection, in people's capacities and capabilities, is what enhances workers' productivity. If you don't go into debt in order to pay for your health, it also does mean that you can have access to health care, which has a preventive function. It can be a prevention measure. It can increase your productivity, your contribution to your enterprises. And for small and medium-sized enterprises, having that social protection system allows the business continuity, as we saw during COVID. A lot of enterprises went underground because they didn't have that access to social insurance. And that's why I think the social insurance system, which brings together and does the kind of really wide risk pooling, is so important, and why that very strong privatization agenda that creams off the well-off to put them into separate funds and deprives the social insurance system of the important contributions that they can make for cross-subsidization and redistribution and social solidarity has to be really watched very carefully. So I think there is a lot of common ground, and I think I want to end on a positive note that our social partners do see the economic and social value of investing in social protection for business continuity, for productivity, for social inclusion, for redistribution and equality, and for rebuilding that social contract, which is in such a sorry state in so many of our countries. And we are seeing the very dangerous political implications when that trust between state and society is not there. So we hope that this compromiso will be a kind of start of a different kind of dialogue and a different kind of agenda of development. With that, I apologize for the shortness of time, and I want to invite you, those of you who can make it to the FIBES 1, which is just across the door in Pavilion 2, to join us for the SPA initiative. The ILO Director General will be joined by 2 ministers from Brazil and from South Africa, and they will launch together the joint ILO USP 2030 SPA initiatives on financing social protection. And this event starts in 30 minutes, so if you can, please join us in FIBES 1, Pavilion 2. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for your attention.